So you were traveling, was it
last week?
Was it this week? Last week.
Yeah.
Last week, yeah. All good? All good there?
Yeah, all good. Catching up with more people than I remember, kind of thing. Over the years, I mean, you know what it's like when you work, especially in community stuff.
Yeah.
You meet people over the years, and networking, I've always found, is one of the biggest things. Just to expand your friendships more than anything, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was one of the very first MVPs I ever met, a guy called Nick Blank, a South African guy. I was going back to 2012, I think it was, 2013. Yeah. He launched a book for Exchange 2013.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was in conjunction with PAWcast.
That can't have been an easy feat.
Yeah. So he also was an MCM. So I don't think they're still around. Microsoft Certified Master.
Yeah, no, I don't think they are. Yeah.
So yeah, all good fun.
Brill. That's good. So I guess we should kick things off with the podcast and start what I guess is episode 2 of. Am I allowed to give it a name now?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So episode 2 of our podcast, which we are calling Not Another Tech Podcast. Love it. There are plenty of them out there. So I think the name is pretty appropriate.
Apt. Oh, definitely.
Absolutely. And I guess the topic for episode 2, right, is we're going in deep for episode 2, Privileged Access Workstations.
Yes.
Topical for lots of different reasons, but I guess to start with, because you've got your Privileged Access Workstation series on YouTube, which you are currently working on at the moment. So I guess why don't we just start the conversation by maybe just between us talking, well, firstly, running through, I guess, what a PAW is for anyone that maybe doesn't know.
Yeah, I guess so. So, I mean, I've had so many different definitions of PAW. So you got PAW, SAW, PAD, SAD. It's just an abbreviation for Privileged Access Workstation or Privileged Access Desktop, Privileged Access Secure Access Desktop or Secure Access Workstation. They all do the same thing. I would say a lot of people have always asked, well, I've got jump box. Does that work? No, doesn't cut it.
Not the same thing, is it?
No.
And just to clarify then, so the jump box, well, a privileged access workstation, we're saying here then is a dedicated hardened device for accessing
100%.
Things like administrative portals and things like that. Jump box. So where would you say that sort of fits in?
I've seen jump boxes more in place for when you need to connect to machines in a other network. Yes, it's isolated, but so DMZ, for example, or people may log on to a jump box to log on to RDP sessions of servers. But again, that's another one of my big bugbears is you don't really need to RDP onto your servers. You shouldn't be, because you've got remote tools to do that. But that's for another story.
Absolutely. No, well said. I was just interested to know your take on it. But yeah, I've seen jump box and PAW used interchangeably, and they're definitely not the same thing.
No,
so I'm totally with you on that.
The PAW, like you say, is a properly securely hardened device. And the Microsoft knowledge base or docs or learn article on it is really good, I think. But it's guidance. Yeah. And I think that's the key thing. It's really good guidance, and it feeds into things like the NCSE, who obviously replicate that as well. I can't remember the post I read, but I read some post that I think one of the Department of Defense contractors had used the Microsoft article to baseline their PAW on as well. Yeah. The idea is you lock it down for internet access, or restrict its internet access, more to the point, because it's that age-old argument. Do you want to access Outlook, Mail, Facebook, Twitter, or X, all those social media websites like you do on your everyday machine, potentially, from a privileged access workstation? No. You shouldn't need to. Why would you give it internet access? It only needs to access the M365 services. And do you open up to other services? So I mentioned PAWcast earlier, or Proofpoint. Do you have it built in with that as well? you could do, depending on budget and requirements. But that's kind of my view on a PAW, really.
Yeah, totally agree. And I guess just to echo what you were saying there, its sort of primary purpose, I guess, is to sort of isolate privileged tasks from day-to-day tasks, right? Is kind of the point of that, and the idea being that you can sort of limit things like lateral movement in the case of an account that's been compromised.
Absolutely, that's it.
Yeah,
and I think I mentioned it last week, and I have on the blog post and in the video. Can you use a compliant device as a PAW? Absolutely not. I get the thought process there, and a number of people I've spoken to, they say, well, I use a YubiKey and a compliant device. That's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, well said.
But it's still, you can still do better.
Yeah.
I would say it's, absolutely, you shouldn't have non-compliant devices being able to log into the admin center, like you and I discussing earlier on, back end of last week. That gives me the fear. The fact that you could potentially
keep you up at night, Andy.
You could potentially log on to a device with a privileged account from any machine that's not controlled by an organization. I think that is a big no-no in my book. I think there's no think about it. It's a big no-no because that's where risks start to happen. So using things like device extension attributes, which are now supported in Enter, I mean, they've been supported for quite a long time, you can limit access to a privileged access workstation. And I think it was Rue who got me onto that thought process in the first place a few years ago, possibly now, where you use the block command. So you create a policy which is actually block and use the accept if the device extension attribute is privileged access workstation, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I really like that idea of actually setting policies for block.
So
I don't think people use that enough, actually.
Totally agree. And it's funny, actually, that you should say that, because I did a recent, I'll say recent, it was sort of November last year, webinar with Microsoft on the Entra Global Secure Access stuff. And I was sort of covering the internet access piece. And in all of the documentation for setting that up, they were using the grant control of the allow grant controls. And I just flipped it on its head, because I similar to what you're saying there, I prefer that sort of default deny approach where possible using the block, and that just feels like it's the more appropriate. Well, it's the zero trust framework method approach, right?
Don't trust, always verify.
Exactly. So no, I totally agree with you there, and we'll get into maybe some tactics for hardening PAWs shortly. What I think it'd be worth just touching on today is, I guess, cloudPAWs, because there is this notion, I guess, that there is a PAW, a physical device, and then there's cloudPAWs. And I guess I'd be interested to discuss with you on what makes cloud-based PAWs sort of like a strong alternative, maybe to a physical one.
Yep.
So interested to know what your thoughts are on that first, I guess.
I mean, nothing substitutes a physical PAW, I think, in all honesty. Let's be honest there. A physical PAW is the preferred method, but you've got other headaches to contend with that. One is cost. Two is you've then got to carry two devices around, or I have spoken to somebody who had to carry, I think, several devices because they had their PAW for M365, they had their PAW for AD, and then they had PAW for another service, so all other cloud services. It's just a nightmare.
I mean, it's not even sustainable, is it? Really.
No. But my view there is, if you're working in that kind of environment, you're not going to be working from home. You're going to be stuck in a basement somewhere in a big building, and you've got to go through all kind of security checks to actually get into the building. So do you need to take those devices away with you? Probably not. Yeah.
Well said.
But with this, I've done a lot of work with public sector, NHS, et cetera, and one of the biggest gripes I heard was the fact that they always had to carry several devices around. And then Microsoft released Windows 365. I mean, AVD's been around for a lot longer than Win 365. And it was like, actually, that started a thing for me. Could this be an alternative solution?
Yeah.
And I personally, I think you're the same kind of thought. It actually will meet a need for users to get to that point of, not using a compliant device that everyone uses on a daily basis, but using a specific device. So you've got that segregated, but it also ties down to the account. Something, again, we've discussed before. Don't use a synced account for your privileged account. It's have something completely separate and use the .onmicrosoft.com domain.
Yeah.
Because like I've had before where customers have changed domain name through a rebrand, they've got their admin account that A is synced, well, that shouldn't be done, but B, they're using the domain name that they had before and it breaks SSO. So if you've got an admin account on SSO on a domain name that's broken, you're then up the creek without a paddle and you can't do anything. But I think that's another chat. Let's talk about those synced, non-synced accounts later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I totally agree with you. I think when you're talking about physical, PAWs, like you say, they are almost considered, I guess, the gold standard. But there is a separate discussion around, whether they're appropriate for an organization. And there's going to be different scenarios, right? Like you said there, if you've got an admin that's coming into the office every single day, then that might be an appropriate reason to do something like that. But in sort of today's modern world, a lot of that administrative work is happening remotely. So, having something like AVD or Windows 365, which is easy to provision, centrally managed, all that kind of stuff is appealing, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it still gives you that segregation, that separation from the day-to-day tasks and the day-to-day device that you're using.
Somebody also asked me, can I use a VM on my actual device? You could, but you've then got management of that. Okay, you can manage it through Intune and everything. You enter join it, but you've then got the hassle of deploying that to that device. Okay, you could.
So just to clarify, are you referring to using like a guest VM?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hyper-V or Parallels or something like that.
Got you. So I would probably. I'll tell you exactly my stance on that. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's a feasible solution.
No. Purely
because it's still being provisioned and managed from your day-to-day device.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like that's not that clear. There's not enough of a clear segregation between the tiers.
It's a bit like using duct tape to plug a huge gap in a pipe that's running water.
Yeah.
It will stick for a bit, but then it's just not manageable because
it's sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But it's like if you go to all the effort of hardening the guest OS, but if you just need a password that's an 8-digit password, 8-character password to get into the physical device, then what's the point? It doesn't.
I'm with you on that one, but it's also the deployment of it, and it's that painstaking process of you've got to deploy that VM to that host. You've then got all sorts of things, and if your device then breaks, you've lost both devices. So even from a practical point of view, it's just not feasible in my book. And that's why I then thought. I run Hyper-V on my home lab at home, so I thought, well, could I do it that way? Just RDP onto another session, but again, it's reliant on a password through an RDP session. The idea here is to get away from passwords as best as we can as well, I think. Because passwords are the weakest link. And so that's why I then thought, well, Win 365, great idea. And then I started playing around with AVD. And it's Win 365 I absolutely love. I think it's a brilliant offering. But obviously you need that license for it. And yes, you need a license for AVD. But AVD can do shut VM down at 7 o'clock and start VM on Connect. So you can reduce your cost a bit as well.
So it's interesting you say that, because I kind of want to just touch on that a little bit, actually, before we get into sort of the hardening measures, because I guess that's two very different scenarios between, differences between the AVD and the Windows 365. Windows 365 is fixed cost, right? It's SaaS based.
Yeah.
It's like buying a Microsoft 365 E5 license. So you've got those. I guess it's kind of easy. It's simpler to manage from a cost perspective because you know how much it's going to be. But then, like you said there, you could potentially save money if you're using an AVD session host that you can automatically shut down outside of hours where you're not going to need it, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds like you potentially answered the question already. Which one would you prefer? It sounds like maybe AVD for that particular reason.
Yeah. I'm jury's still out there.
Okay.
AVD is my preferred because of the ease of deploying it. The fact you just deploy a couple of session hosts and add users to groups. I think that's great, and there's no license needed there. Win365 because it's a dedicated device for a user.
Yeah,
you can look at frontline worker license potentially, and have 3 users on that one Win365. Would that work? I need to have a look at the licensing options, but that's what FLW is for. You allow multiple people who do shift work to log into a single machine. You can't log on multi-session like AVD, but you can log on 3 different people can log on at different times.
Yeah.
One thing I'm just starting to discover with AVD, I say discover, is we all know about profiles and FS logics, etc., etc. FS logics on Azure storage isn't supported for Entra join only. Entra join only users. Hybrid users.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, they have to be hybrid users.
Because it uses Cloud Kerberos linked back to the on-prem AD.
Yeah.
So it then comes down to the profile management of accounts on AVD. They're local, which means it lead up disk storage. So you need to provision your AVD with ample disk storage, I would say.
That's a good point, yeah.
But you're not really going to be doing much that's going to inflate the
I was going to say
profile.
that shouldn't be too much of a problem on a PAW. No. But worth considering, right?
Yeah, because you don't need email as a privileged account.
Yeah.
I've seen it where people assign an E3 license to their privileged accounts. So you don't need that, because if that email is another form of an attack, because people are going to start sending you emails, spamming you, anything. My kind of what I've done in the past is I've set up privileged users as mail-enabled users with the external address of my everyday account. Yeah. So if Microsoft send me information on an email, I get the email in my everyday inbox.
Yeah. I totally agree. Good strategy. So is that using plus addressing then to achieve that? Yeah. That's typically how I'd recommend. Yeah.
So
that sounds good.
It just means that if you're using things like access packages or whatever that send an email to your admin account that needs to approve, you get it in your everyday inbox, because again, you're not going to want to log into your PAW all day, every day to just check your email.
Totally agree. And likewise, if you've got a privileged access account, an admin account, it shouldn't be licensed for email.
Exactly.
You shouldn't have a mailbox. But you still need to receive those notifications. So, it is important.
It's a chicken and the egg.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing that I have been thinking about since we started the discussion around the differences between AVD and Windows 365. And that is when you're thinking about the management aspect, specifically, I guess, the control plane piece of it. Windows 365, I guess the fundamental infrastructure on the back end is abstracted away from you. So the control plane is slightly different. I guess the control plane for Windows 365 is Intune. So you're talking Intune administrator level. The M365 portal. AVD is kind of different because it's Azure based. You've got management groups, you've got resource groups, subscriptions. There's a whole different RBAC model there to think about.
Exactly.
So I guess if you were to ask me, if I was to answer the question right now, which one would I probably prefer out of the two, I would probably go with AVD.
Okay.
I would go with AVD purely because you've got those extra capabilities from an RBAC perspective
That's actually true.
On the Azure piece.
Yeah.
I think Windows 365 definitely has its place, but actually to be able to implement your own tiered system or tiered solution or privileged access, tiering solution in Azure using Azure RBAC across management groups, subscriptions, resource groups, however that might look like, that would give you, I think, ample amount of segregation from things like, because ultimately you might even want to take it as far as saying, okay, Andy, you are one of the administrators that logs into the Privileged Access Workstation, but you might have a separate set of administrators who manage the infrastructure for those Privileged Access Workstations. You might even consider that as a separate tier potentially. So being able to segregate those, I think, is quite important.
100%. I mean, the other thing there is any admin logging onto any PAW, not just a cloud one, shouldn't be a local admin on that device.
Yeah.
In fact, nobody should be a local admin on any device. That's my view. I've gone to the point now, even on my Mac, I'm just a user. So every time I need to install software, I need to enter username and password. And I think that's good practice for anyone to get into, because so many things can be installed in, without you realizing sometimes.
Totally agree.
So absolutely, with that, you have a separate management for managing AVD.
And it does add some complexity to it. I totally get that and appreciate that. And I think that's why you've got to have that initial conversation, or certainly I would have those initial conversations with organizations to say, do you want, is that extra management overhead important enough from a risk perspective?
Yeah.
For you to sort of go down that route.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I definitely think there's a conversation to have there.
What's deemed as an acceptable risk at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And
talk about that local admin. One scary thing for one of the very, very large companies I used to work for, I'm not mentioning the name, I was a local admin on my device.
Yeah. Madness.
Obviously there's tools that they have to monitor and maintain. I installed TeamViewer on my device, and I then had an email saying, that's not an approved piece of software. Please remove it within the next few days, or if not, we'll blast your machine. Which is a good stance. At the same time, I guess I shouldn't have been able to install it.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's one of those things that's like, kind of appreciate the fact that there's some monitoring there, and you've been notified of the fact that you've done it, and you've been told, fix it, or we'll fix it for you. Like you say, in today's world, like, nobody needs to be a local admin. It's as simple as that. When you're looking at things like using things like laps, which just makes things a lot easier for, help desk staff that do potentially need to elevate as local admin every now and again, with the introduction of things like laps. And even when it comes to installing software, if it's approved software, if you've got a list of approved software, deploy it through Company Portal, deploy it through Intune, make it available to users so that they can just install it like they would install an app from the App Store. And then they can't go wrong. They can't install stuff that 100%. They're not allowed to use. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I'm just conscious of time, but I'd like to sort of touch on steps for kind of things we should be thinking about for hardening a cloud PAW. So just to go into a bit more detail on that. And I guess so I'd like to sort of kick things off with, we've touched on some of it already, to be fair, and that's using things like FIDO2. So introduction of passkeys now, passkey, FIDO2 support. I'm fairly certain is supported on AVDs, right?
Yep.
FIDO2 supported on AVD. I know it's supported on Windows 365. So making use of strong authentication, I guess initially to get onto those devices is super important. So I guess you mentioned access packages, and I'm just trying to think there from an identity and access perspective, what you could maybe do with that. You could even use an access package. This is really going one step further. You could use an access package for your administrator account to give them access to the AVD on an ad hoc basis. So they don't have standing access to, for example, the Azure Virtual Machine role, is it? I forget what it's called. There's a role that you need.
Azure Virtual Desktop or something. I can't remember what it is.
There's one of those a role that's required. But you could even say, okay, so the actual admin account doesn't even have that role. They have to activate an access package or activate a PIM. PIM request might be a more appropriate way to do it.
I was thinking that because I looked at that as one option, but it then comes down to the chicken and the egg.
So
because it's what resources can your privileged account access without using the PAW, for example. Because in order to
it's a good point. But I'm fairly certain that the PIM, I mean, you'd have to test it, but I'm fairly certain the My Roles section of PIM has got a built-in exclusion.
Yep.
So there is some caveats to that, I think, but you should be able to access, for example, the PIM portal while blocking, for example, access to admin portals.
No, there is that. I hadn't thought about doing that because my view, whenever I restrict access, it's just, do you know what? I block everything for that user.
Yeah.
So, except the Azure Virtual Desktop, desktop logon, and Windows 365 access,
cloud resources,
because you need it. And then the way I then restrict that is I have my my everyday machine that I again use a device extension attribute for saying. Access cloudPAW, for example, and so again block access to those resources except from a machine that's got that tag.
You default deny.
Because
totally agree.
that then answers the issue of, well, how do you lock down access to those remote desktop sessions from any device? It's like we need to use device extension attributes again. I think they're brilliant. I
agree, and even if you don't want to go down the route of using extension attributes, because there is it's minuscule, right, in the grand scheme of things, but there's an extra step there to actually add the extension attribute. But I guess if you're enrolling your devices into Entra anyway, they've got an object ID, which is also specific to them. So you can use the device object ID within the device filter as well in conditional access. So you could even do something like that. But totally appreciate that. That's a really good point, actually. So sort of allowing admin sign in only from PAWs is the kind of thing that you probably want to be looking at. Blocking those accounts from accessing non-admin workloads might be something. So blocking, like you said there, was access to block everything apart from Windows 365, AVD, all that kind of stuff. So they're not going to have access to things like Office 365 or any third-party apps that might have been integrated with single sign-on. I guess from an endpoint perspective and an OS perspective, so I'd be looking at things like security baselines. If you're using Intune, that's a great way to get up and running quickly. Just enforce some security baselines on those devices. So that's going to be including things like attack surface reduction rules, potentially app locker, putting some application hardening in place with either app locker or WDAC. Either of those would maybe work. So, absolutely. Defender. And I guess utilizing the device risk capability within your compliance policies as well.
And even to the point of, or if this is a big if, you do allow internet access from the PAWs, use the Defender Cloud filtering, web filtering, and block everything on there except the bare minimum. I mean, the way the Microsoft docs go through it is you set a proxy on the server to.
I've seen that,
the local host, or no, it's not your local IP, your 172.0.0.1, it's 172.0.0.2, you loop back, I think it is. And then, but you exclude a bunch of URLs, but that's hard to manage. You can script it, you can probably deploy it through Intune, but again, it's a bit of a headache, I think.
I did see that.
Make it as simple as possible.
I'm just looking at that now as well. So they also recommend sort of using rules in Intune for the Microsoft Defender firewall.
Yep.
So that's blocking that's essentially adjusting the rules so that you are restricting everything as much as possible.
Again,
the URL lock proxy is what they suggest. Deny all outbound traffic except selected Azure and Microsoft services, including Azure Cloud Shell, and the ability to allow self-service password reset, which, interestingly enough, I disagree with that last one. I wouldn't usually recommend allowing self-service password reset for admin accounts.
I remember you mentioning that before, and I agree with you on that one. It's actually, when you mentioned that, the penny kind of dropped.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, no, that makes sense, because if you've forgotten your admin password, there are other admins to get in there, but also that's what your break glass account's for.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Totally agree.
And again, we should also mention exclude your break glass accounts from all these policies.
Yes.
Because the last thing you want to do is, if you find your AVD infrastructure's gone belly up or something, or you can't access, your break glass accounts can be used out with that. If you've got it tied in with it, again, you're up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, there's a few things there, but it's like I said earlier, Microsoft, it's just guidance. A lot of people take it as gospel.
Yeah.
But I think it's use what's right for you, common sense all the way. And
be pragmatic with your approach, 100%.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Totally agree. It's the same with, do you need other software on your PAW? I don't think so, but actually a lot of my stuff I do in VS Code.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, you got PowerShell ISE on there, but deploying something like Visual Code, yes, it's another piece of software to update and maintain. But again, depending on type of business you are, your security risks, etc. Personally, I don't have an issue with putting that on my PAW, because I use that frequently, because I'll do something in dev, but then I need to tweak it for production. So what better way to do it than do it in VS Code on your PAW?
Totally agree. And I guess the only thing to take into consideration in that stance is, because it's ultimately a third-party application, is making sure that you've got some sort of patch management in place. As long as it's being updated appropriately, then it makes total sense.
Yeah. I mean, do you need access to GitHub? No, I would say not. Would you? Personally,
might make your life potentially a little bit easier as an admin, but the question is it needed?
Should you make it harder if something happens?
Yeah.
It's GitHub's great. Absolutely love GitHub. I use it quite a lot now. But do you need to access it from your Privileged Access Workstation? The more I think about it, no, you don't, because you can just copy it down and do some kind of file sharing securely, whether it's through SharePoint or something.
Although that would be difficult if they're not able to access Office 365. But it's a great example of understanding the kind of processes and workflows that you might need to allow for within your environment, and building that into your privileged access strategy, because that's ultimately what it boils down to. It's a strategy,
100%. Yeah, it's that's the key word. It's the strategy. And I've had some companies I've spoken to. It's like, we're not mature enough yet. We're not there yet. It's actually, that's a poor excuse. This should be, if you've not thought about it just now, do it now. Even if you just do something where you're running a separate machine for your admin accounts, that again is a step in the right direction.
I agree.
You're not going to get there overnight.
Yeah, you can build on that. Yeah, totally agree. I guess I just want to sort of, again, conscious of time, sort of something that's worth mentioning is logging and monitoring, because it's another great reason, another great thing you should be doing with your Privileged Access Workstation. When we talked about break glass accounts before. So typically what I would usually recommend clients do is set up some sort of auditing and alerting. So when a break glass account is signed into, an alert is raised, you could have something similar for Privileged Access Workstation. So you could say, maybe they're locked down geolocations, for example, or maybe they're not locked down for good reason. Maybe you might need to allow sign-ins from lots of different parts of the world, but maybe you want some alerting or monitoring in place when that happens. Or maybe you want to be alerted if there's a signing from a malicious IP address or something along those lines. So implementing something like that, which I guess you could do with Defender XDR, custom alert rules, log analytics alert rules. There's a couple of different ways you could do that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I won't say the list is endless, because it is, and there is an end to it. But you can do so much. It comes down to your licensing agreements, what you have available, how long to keep those audits for as well. I think it's a great one with the auditing of your break glass accounts, because you want to know when they're logged in with, and it's you need to test them as well. Yes,
totally agree.
So, it's, I mean, the way I looked at it was you don't want to go for the basic auditing. Yes, it will cover you for something, but you want something that's going to give you some meaningful information there when it comes to that. And do you have alerts? Probably not, because otherwise you'd be inundated with alerts all the time, or you do some kind of filtering. But those,
I think you'd have to refine what you were looking for specifically, for sure. Yeah.
So the other thing, again, I know, conscious of time, because we want to keep this down to half an hour, and we've gone over.
We're already gone over it, yeah.
I know. I think this is a topic that we could just talk all day on. But maybe we should wait for the next episode to talk about PIM and accessing your accounts.
Okay. Yeah, we can dive into maybe some strategies for that in the next episode. Again, very conscious of time now. Let's wrap things up. But when can we expect your next video? Because I'm following along, so I'm keen to see it.
I should hopefully have time this Friday to get it done.
Nice.
So
okay. That's cool.
I'll do the conditional access to get it locked down, and then I'll do that one first. And then I'll spend some time working on the hardening and how to really go about hardening it. Because at the moment, I've just done it all through the bog standard stuff that's on the Microsoft site. But I want to try a few things out on it. Yeah. So
that's the whole idea of the conversations, right? And digging into it. So I'm interested to see how you get on and interested to follow along with that. So I'll be looking out for that dropping into my notifications when you release that video.
And I love your stay about auth context and everything with PIM.
Cheers, man.
That's very apt for this.
Absolutely.
I think there's a whole new thing we can do on PIM, because those conditional access policies I assign to a group, which is a dynamic group populated with ADM accounts.
Yeah. But
I also want to set alerting on there to say if somebody creates an account with a privileged role that doesn't format that, I want to know.
Yeah.
Because it's conditional access. You can either apply to the role or the user. So I'd much rather apply it to the user rather than the role, because I don't want my privileged accounts to be able to log on to the device where they're not activated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. And there's definitely a lot of different ways you could make that work for you with conditional access. Yeah. Cool. Okay. No, interesting. Well, look, I guess we should wrap up. But it has been a good chat.
It has been.
definitely need to dig into PAWs and PIM in the future, because there's probably more to chat through.
Oh, totally.
But it's been good catching up. And I guess I'll see you in the next episode.
Excellent. Cheers, Nate. You take care.
Take it easy, mate.
See you later.
Bye.